Joseph Kershaw's South Carolina Brigade in the Confederate breakthrough and the attacks on Snodgrass Hill. And so we will leave here momentarily. We will walk south to join the axis of Kershaw's attack and turn westward, and then walk northward. I do have to tell you that, as many of you all know, I'm generally a very successful professional shade hunter. I found a little bit here. However, this one will involve a walk across part of Dyer Field where there are no trees. So just be aware of that. I will try to make use of shade as absolutely much as possible, but we do have to walk across Dyer Field at one point, it's going to be a little warm probably. So probably not as warm as it was for those South Carolinians, however. We will we'll work across the field up on the slopes of Snodgrass Hill, and then complete the loop back to here. This general graphic of the battle situation on the morning of September the 20th. The Union line represented by the blue blocks on the map. We're here in the sector of Brannan's division on the west side of the Lafayette Road. It is, of course, this division that Rosecrans becomes confused about, believing that Brannan's division is out of line, that there is some sort of a gap or hole in his line at this point, and he then will order the next division to the south, which by the time of that movement is actually Wood's division, Wood coming out of reserve and replacing Negley, so Negley could go north, but Wood's division will move, and the Confederates, by pure dumb luck, will pour through that gap that is open in the Union line and begin the collapse of the southern half of the Union line on the battlefield. I start this walk from here for two reasons. One, to facilitate the end of it, to complete that loop coming back, but also because of the Union line as represented by these monuments here. Those right in this area for Connell's Brigade, the 1st Brigade of Brannan's 3rd Division, and then a little bit further up, that next group of cannon up there, the guns of Battery C, 1st Ohio Light Artillery of Cruxton's Brigade of Brannan's Division, and then the line continuing from Cruxton up into King's Brigade of Reynolds' Division. This part of the Union line on the north side of the gap that is open is going to play a role in our story with Kershaw, and we will not really be able to see this from where we are on the Kershaw's route. So I wanted you all to imprint that in your mind. If you look carefully through the trees right over here, you should be able to detect the sun lighting up the large Dyer Field over there. Now, we might get real lucky when we get over there that we'll be able to look through the trees, and maybe the sun will be lighting up the back of one or more of these monuments, and we might be able to see them. I'm not sure that's going to be the case today, but remember that through this block of woods on this side of the Glen Kelly Road is the Union line, and we'll talk about how that fits into the story as we work. Any questions or observations? Yes, sir. Yes. As a result of the threat to the left end of the line, George Thomas, who still thought Brannan's division was in reserve in Dyer Field, has sent staff officers to get Brannan's division, but Brannan's division is found in the line here. The staff officers saying that Thomas's desire for Brannan's division on the left of the line is imperative. Brannan and Reynolds agree that Reynolds will cover Brannan's position and Brannon will move north while Sanford Kellogg, George Thomas's staff officer, goes to Rosecrans to report that Brannon is moving in response to an order from Thomas, and that something needs to be done to fill Brannon's position. In the end, Brannon did not move because he gets attacked in front. Now, Kellogg, we'll never know for certain what Kellogg tried to tell Rosecrans, we'll never know for certain what Kellogg's words were that he said to Rosecrans. It's entirely possible that he made a less than coherent report to Rosecrans, but Rosecrans came to believe that Brannon's division was out of line. Kellogg may have told him that outright, but more probably Kellogg was trying to explain the overall situation, and the sleep-deprived Rosecrans just misinterpreted what was being told him. And he's already been in this sector 3 times, not 90 minutes ago for the 3rd time, and he just takes that information, doesn't verify it, and he hasn't slept much in the last weeks. All right. There to the north of us, down into the sector where Thomas J. Wood's division is going to be moved and pulled out of line, where the actual gap is located here on the Brotherton farm, and the vast majority of the maps of the battle show at this moment, just before the breakthrough, show James Longstreet's troops formed in the woods on the other side of the Lafayette Road, and famously there is that column of 3 divisions in 5 lines, and that 5th line of the Longstreet's column is the brigades of Benjamin Humphreys, and Mississippians, and Joseph Kershaw's South Carolinians. Both of those brigades of McLaws' division under the command of Joseph Kershaw, because McLaws is not yet here. As you know, the Confederate authorities in Richmond have made the decision to reinforce Braxton Bragg's army, not only by sending troops from Mississippi and East Tennessee, but also by sending much of the 1st Corps of the Army in Northern Virginia, James Longstreet's Corps, and that decision is made not until after Ambrose Burnside has gotten astride the railroad in East Tennessee, meaning that instead of a 600-mile rail route from Virginia, it is 970 miles coming through eastern, North, and South Carolina into eastern Georgia, across Georgia, and up to northwest Georgia. That route is longer, involves more rail companies, and the need to coordinate rail equipment between multiple companies, including some different gauges. This is one of the times when rail gauge has an effect on movement, but also between companies whose lines do not necessarily connect with one another in some of the towns, and for the easternmost route that went through Wilmington, North Carolina, they had to then cross the Cape Fear River on a steamboat. Anyway, there was no rail connection across there. So it is a longer route, requiring more coordination, and it thereby slows the rate at which these 2 divisions will move. And Longstreet leaves Virginia with 9 brigades, only 5 of which will arrive in time to actually participate in the battle. Only 3 are here on September the 19th. Only 1 is effective and available on September the 18th. So they're arriving in almost a trickle at the end of that 900-mile rail route over there at Catoosa Platform and Catoosa Station. The 5th Brigade to arrive in time for the battle is the Brigade of South Carolinians, commanded by Brigadier General Joseph Brevard Kershaw. The original colonel of the 2nd South Carolina, a man who has made quite a reputation for himself now as a brigade commander at several places, including at Fredericksburg, his men manning the sunken road there at the base of Marie's Heights on December the 13th, 1862. Like all of Longstreet's troops, they have fought at Gettysburg just 11 weeks before, and Kershaw's brigade had seen heavy action there, had suffered significant casualties, and some of their casualties are amongst some of the most evocative photographs of the war, images of dead soldiers on the battlefield. And in fact, in a good, clean copy of this picture, you can read the initials and the unit identity on those headstones in that grave. These are some men of the 3rd South Carolina of Kershaw's brigade. And now, 11 weeks later, and more than 1,000, well, actually, by the time you add up marching from their camps to here, more than 1,000 miles from where they last were, and certainly last were engaged, they're about ready to go into battle again. Yesterday, when we were talking about Benning's brigade, was asked about the uniforms. All of Longstreet's troops, the Army of Northern Virginia troops, have been re-uniformed recently in Virginia with jackets made out of blue-gray English Army cloth, and they have light blue trousers on. This Don Triani image, we're going to have to get the guy, the photocopy service guy, to come. The colors need to be rectified on the printer, but we lose a little bit of the color here. But they were certainly more uniformly dressed than your typical soldier of Bragg's army. And that is something that is noted. I'll pass those two images around if you want to look at them a little more carefully. Kershaw's men having arrived at the end of the railroad in several increments, will then be marched to the I'll read Kershaw's report here about his arrival. At midnight on September the 18th, the last of my brigade arrived at the terminus of the railroad near Catoosa Station. The next morning, marched under orders from the general commanding to Ringgold, in which place we united with Brigadier General Humphrey's brigade. After nightfall on the 19th, orders were received from the Lieutenant General commanding to join General Hood with the command. We moved at once and marched across Alexander's Bridge and bivouacked at 1 a.m. on September the 20th. So they will make a night march the night of the 19th and just the very beginning of the 20th, and arrive at Alexander's Bridge just in the very beginning of September the 20th and bivouac. At 9 o'clock, we were ordered by the Lieutenant General commanding to a position in reserve of Hood's division near the headquarters of the commanding general. They will move forward, and one of the things that that this helps illustrate is that while most of the maps show Kershaw and Humphreys' men formed up as this fifth line of the column, they are only really moving into that position when the order to advance is given. Kershaw will go on to say, about 11 o'clock, I was ordered forward with the command to report to Major General Hood. Arriving, I found his troops engaged in the front. By the time they actually moved right up behind Hood, Hood has already begun the assault, sending forward Johnson's division, the first two lines. General Hood directed me to form line in his rear, with my center resting on the spot where I found him, which I suppose was his center. Forming line, Humphreys' brigade on my left, as rapidly as possible, under fire of the enemy, and in a thick wood, I moved as directed to the front. I had been directed to occupy a line of breastworks. That's the line of Confederate field fortifications that are constructed on the crest of a low rise in the woods to the east of the Lafayette Road. The Confederates who occupied that position late on September the 19th and early on the 20th had, just as the Federals further to the north on the same low rise, the Confederates there had constructed field fortifications as well. Colonel Nance of the 3rd South Carolina says that when we were advanced by flank a short distance and thrown into line of battle, about 200 to 300 yards behind and parallel to a line of breastworks in the woods, running, as I judged, nearly north and south. So they move up and form into to line, but before they have really fully gotten position, the order is given to advance. By this time, there is the sound of combat going on in front of them, and Kershaw will order his 6 regiments to now advance from that line of breastworks. Now Kershaw is going to have quite a time commanding his almost 1,600-man brigade. Because of those transportation issues, the train carrying the horses of Kershaw and his staff and all of the field officers of the brigade has not arrived. In fact, for one of the first times, these colonels, lieutenant colonels, and majors, and Kershaw himself, the brigade commander, brigadier general, when they came from the end of the railroad at Catoosa Station or Catoosa Platform, they covered the ground the same way their soldiers did, on foot. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Gaylord of the 2nd South Carolina, knowing he has no horse, and hence won't be able to have his blankets or coat carried forward, strapped to the back of his horse, he has actually made up a blanket roll just like the soldiers and is wearing it as he marches forward. So now Kershaw is going to try to command his brigade and Humphreys' brigade on foot. And also, not all of his staff officers have arrived. Only one of his regular staff officers is present, and he has detailed 2 other men to assist him as staff officers. Because the brigade staff has no horses and hence limited mobility, one man is detailed from each of the regiments to serve as a runner to communicate between the regiment and Kershaw and his small command group on foot. And again, because of limited mobility, Kershaw has deputized one of his staff officers to be his representative on the right half of the brigade. Kershaw will take more care with the left half of the brigade. Kershaw is going to have a real challenge commanding now his very large brigade going into action, being on foot, let alone having to also command the brigade of Mississippians to his left. But they do reach or do move forward, and as Kershaw says, we crossed the Lafayette Road near a house, and crossing the open ground, entered the woods beyond. Colonel Nance of the 3rd South Carolina says, we immediately advanced towards the firing in a westerly direction, crossing what I understood was the Lafayette Road, just to the left of a small house, just on this side of the house, and thence through the woods in front. And so, if you can imagine, a long line, nearly half a mile in length, of nearly 1,600 Mississippians South Carolinians, with Mississippians beyond them, dressed like this, moving forward at a walk, coming out of the woods. The 3rd South Carolina, the left center of the brigade, passing this side of the house, the 3rd South Carolina Battalion, the 2nd South Carolina, passing right around the buildings of the Brotherton Farmstead and just to the south of it, and then Humphreys Mississippians coming out of the woods, crossing the road, and moving across the field. They are now moving forward, truly as the 5th line of the assault columns. Questions or observations here? Yes, sir.
So, remind me, because I believe I've heard you discuss this before, the formation of these units was not what Longstreet had envisioned originally.
That is correct.
Okay.
Right. Because what Bragg had told Longstreet the night before, when Longstreet awoke Bragg and Longstreet got his instructions from Bragg, Bragg's direction was that all divisions of the Army, at that moment it was 10, were to get online side by side to one another from north to south. And Longstreet, initially commanding 5 divisions, by this time 6, because Kershaw is here with Kershaw and Humphreys Brigade, but initially 5. Longstreet intended, when he rode out that morning to try, beginning about 3 a.m., he intended to try to get all 5 of those divisions online side by side to one another. And if it had worked for him, it would have been Stewart in the north, then Law's division, then Bushrod Johnson's division, then Hindman's division, and then Preston's division. But because unbeknownst to Longstreet, Bushrod Johnson had been told to keep his right connected to Stewart's left, when Longstreet ordered Stewart to shift to the north to make room for Law, who was behind Stewart on the front line. Bushrod Johnson saw Stewart going to the north, and Bushrod Johnson moved north. No space ever opened in the front line, and so Law is left behind Johnson. And there's Longstreet, fearing that there wasn't time to try to correct it, just said, okay, I'll accept that. And then just shortly before, he sent Johnson, Law, and Hindman forward. Kershaw arrives. And he then tells Kershaw to follow in Hood's wake, Hood commanding Johnson and Law's divisions. And that's how you then get that 5th line of the assault columns.
And I believe you said before that this is the only time that a column attack has ever worked.
Right.
There have been many planned.
And many attempted.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the most successful column assault of the Civil War. Why? There's nobody in front of it. Yeah. Every other column assault of the Civil War is less than successful as planned, because something causes the first line to get checked even for a moment, and the follow-on lines then collapse on top of that first line and the others. And you get an intermingling of commands. even the biggest column assault of the entire Civil War, the Second Corps of the Army of the Potomac at Spotsylvania on May 12, it punched in the tip of the mule shoe, but that's as far as it went. The intermingling of commands, just they can't get the forward momentum going again. So.
Jim, the line of breastworks, is that kind of along where the trail would be over
Right,
there?
yeah, where that trail is, yes.
Did any other brigades have an issue with the horses?
Humphreys is in the same way, and there are apparently only a limited number of horses in Hood's division under Law. But some of their horses are here because Hood jumps his horse off of the train over at Catoosa platform. But Kershaw and Humphreys are really handicapped because they don't have horses at all. So, Kershaw is trying to command a division on foot.
Good thing they had radios.
Yep. All righty, so let's fall in and join Kershaw's advance. That road just to the left of a small house, and crossing the open ground beyond, entered the woods. Then through the woods in front. The woods that Kershaw and Nance are talking about are the ones that we are progressing through or have progressed through, and even the ones here as we enter onto the Dyer farm. As Kershaw goes on to say, while passing through the last wood, Lieutenant General Longstreet directed me to look out for my right flank, and I disposed Colonel Hennigan's 8th South Carolina, my right regiment, in such a manner as to cover me in that direction as I supposed. Why does he say that Longstreet has directed him to watch his right flank? At that time, even though troops of Bushrod Johnson's division, McNair's brigade, has battled Brannan's division, particularly Connell's brigade, up there where we started out, the Union line that I pointed out, even though Benning's brigade has battled against Connell, and even though Connell is being pushed off to the north, that is a fight going on. The Union troops on the north side of the gap, Connell's brigade and Cruxton's brigade, were not routed out of their positions. They will wind up conducting a fighting withdrawal off to the northwest. And so as Kershaw's men pass through this ground, they hear quite a fight going to their right. And what Longstreet is concerned about, that he tells Kershaw, is that he should look to his right, guard against any Federal force that might come on his right. And so he directs Colonel Hennigan, commanding his right regiment, the 8th South Carolina, to deploy that regiment so as to guard the right flank. And that is going to leave the 8th South Carolina moving from south to north through this block of woods on the east side of the road, the Glen Kelly Road. And we'll learn more about that over the next few minutes as well. Kershaw goes on and says, I proceeded nearly to what I understood to be the Cove Road. And Colonel Nance says, we proceeded until we reached the fence at the edge of a large corn and stubble field. So let's see if we can now push on. Our brigade diminished by one regiment on the right. Let's push on towards that corn and stubble field. particularly here along the edge of the woods. Watch out for some stump holes and some little mini sinkholes. From the Poe farm to the Brotherton farm, we've now come here to the edge of the Dyer field, and of course, what we are looking at is the collapse of the Union right as a result of the gap in the line and the Confederates pouring through that gap. Bushrod Johnson's provisional division, the first two lines of the assault column, force through that gap, and they're going to push on westward across this ground. But as the third and fourth lines come through, they will begin to turn into the flanks of the Union troops on the north side of the gap. That's the fight that has caused Longstreet to direct Kershaw to detach his 8th South Carolina to guard the right flank of Kershaw's brigade. And so now, as Kershaw reaches the edge of the woods here and looks into these fields, sees evidence of retreating Federals, of Confederate success, he's minus one of his regiments. As Colonel Nance said, they've now reached the fence on the edge of a large corn and stubble field. Kershaw says, having reached the point last mentioned, the firing on my right became very heavy, and a portion of General Hood's division fell back along my line. What he's referring to is, as Hood's men, or Hood's division under Law, attack westward, they actually angle northward, and in particular Robertson's brigade is going to go up onto the crest of the hill over there, where there's going to be a brief Union counterattack by Parker's brigade of Wood's division. And that counterattack is going to drive Robertson's brigade back into these woods, and it's going to necessitate Kershaw's response. As some of Hood's old men of his old Texas brigade under Robertson fall back, Kershaw says, I changed front almost perpendicular to the right on Colonel Nance's 3rd South Carolina Regiment, my left center, which I had indicated as the directing battalion. Nance himself says, here we met a portion of General Hood's division returning in disorder under a feeble fire from the enemy, who seemed to be forming in front and on a line nearly perpendicular to our line of battle. By order of General Kershaw, I changed front forward on my 1st company and the other battalions conforming to the maneuver of mine as the directing one. Our line was placed in a position to continue the advance. This movement had just been accomplished when an officer of Brigadier General Law's staff informed me of the unfortunate loss of General Hood and suggested that as senior brigadier, I should assume the direction of the 2 brigades of that division on my right. General Bushrod R. Johnson was present and called for a comparison of rank. In the middle of the battle, with bullets flying in the air and shells bursting, Bushrod Johnson said, excuse me, General Kershaw, I believe I am senior to you. They're going to have a data rank check right on the battlefield. They don't carry modern commission cards like our officers do today, so that they could have a data rank check by literally whipping out their cards, but they do, and Kershaw maintains that he is senior. In actuality, Johnson was right. He was senior to Kershaw. But at this moment, Kershaw makes it seem as if he is senior, and that it seemed to satisfy him. Major Cunningham, Inspector General to General Hood's staff, who had been sent by the General to conduct me, made the opportune suggestion that the Lieutenant General commanding be informed of Hood's wounding. Relieved of this, I requested Cunningham to also direct Humphreys to move up and support me on my right, he having been thrown to my rear by my change of front. General Johnson had undertaken to advance a brigade on my left. The last of Hood's division engaged in my front had just retired when I ordered the advance, directing Colonel Hennigan to extend the right and engage the enemy in that direction until Humphreys' arrival, who was then in motion. And Colonel Nance says the advance was immediately resumed. And so now, in response to Harker's counterattack, which drives Robertson's brigade back and part of other commands back, Kershaw has now turned his brigade from facing westward to facing northward, and he's requested Humphreys, who had been on his left but is now behind him, he requests Humphreys to reorient and fall in on his right. Until Humphreys gets there, the 8th South Carolinians can continue watching the right, and Bushrod Johnson said he would bring one of his brigades up on Kershaw's left. And Kershaw then orders an advance towards the Federals and the north end of the field. When Kershaw gave the when Kershaw gave the order to advance across the field, he went to the color bearer of the 3rd South Carolina and asked for the colors. And as that color bearer later will relate, Kershaw didn't ride. He walked up and said to me, "Sergeant, let me have the flag." I said, "No, you can't get the flag. Tell me where you want it to go, and I'll take it there." I pointed to the battalion and said, "The general is their general is the trouble," meaning that the regiment was losing its direction, or causing the brigade to lose its direction. Whereupon Kershaw, pointing to the wooded heights to the north, now to be made famous for 1,000 years by this heroic assault and perhaps no less heroic defense by Thomas, said, "Sergeant, select a tree or object straight to the front and march directly to it." Kershaw then hurried to the color bearer of the 3rd South Carolina Battalion, the next unit to the left of the 3rd South Carolina, and gave similar orders. The battle flags are important control measures on the battlefield, and within a brigade line, one of the regiments would be designated as the one on which the others were to guide. In this case, the left center regiment, the 3rd South Carolina, was the battalion of direction for the brigade. And so Kershaw has gone to that color bearer, tried to get the flag to lead the regiment himself. Color bearer wouldn't give the flag up, and so they have agreed that he is to march straight forward, and he selects a large pine tree on the top of the hill there to march directly to. Now, as the battalion of direction, the battalions or the regiments on the right-hand side of the colors were to be looking left to guide on that flag. The regiments on the left side of the colors were to be looking right to guide on that flag. Any idea what might that cause? Some compression towards the center. And we'll see that in just a minute. So now, the enemy occupied the skirt of the woods on the farther side of the field. His right extending into the woods beyond the field. His left crossing the Cove Road, which Kershaw thinks the Glen Kelly Road is. His colors were ostentatiously displayed along the lines. Nance says, the enemy's line in front of my regiment rested on the summit of a commanding hill on the west or far side of the field, along which ran a thickly wooded forest. The distance across this field was about 800 yards, with a fence intervening about 1/4 of the distance. As soon as we crossed the fence, I ordered bayonets fixed and moved at the double quick. I won't make us move at the double quick, but we will now begin to move forward.
Do we know if the fellow there made it?
He does make it.
Was Harker actually in the middle of the field?
Yes, Harker is going to, and I'll say more about Harker when we get up there, but he is going to attack from the very far north end of the field, over that spur, and then down into the field. So.
I got a quick question.
Okay?
At this point, the Union artillery that was here on this little spur, were they a factor?
No, there are 26 guns up there. 9 of them have been captured up there. The other 20 or the other 17 have escaped. 6 more of them will be captured as they try to get out. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the Confederates who come out into this field know that those guns have been captured. Other Confederate units are going to go up there and claim capturing those guns, but they were captured before all of this by parts of McNair's and Gregg's, now Suggs, brigades. First, Kershaw did not see it happen, but it is out here in this field where John Bell Hood is wounded. Hood was riding forward, apparently between the 4th and 5th lines of the assault column, or just behind his old division, now under Law, just in front of Kershaw and Humphreys, when he rode out into this area and saw his old brigade being driven back by Harker's brigade in that brief counterattack from the north end of the field southward. And Hood, not liking very much the idea of this old brigade being driven, Hood rides in amongst them to try to rally the men. And as he does that, knowing that Kershaw is coming up from behind, he, according to Dr. John Darby, the First Corps surgeon, who's not here at this moment, but who will leave the most detailed account of this based on his interaction with Hood, his examination of Hood's amputated leg. Hood is on his horse in that field. He is facing basically west, and he is twisted in the saddle, twisted his body in the saddle, so that he can look or yell back or look back towards Kershaw's men behind. And as he has done that, as he's twisted in the saddle, to get the leverage to do that, he has extended his right leg out, pushing the stirrup out, and that has only further put his right thigh parallel with the ground, and a mini ball, almost certainly fired from Harker's brigade, comes along and crashes into the exterior and posterior of his right thigh, passes through the flesh, strikes the femur, at the junction of the middle third and lower third of the femur, travels along the length of the middle third of Hood's femur, shattering it into multiple pieces, exiting the femur at the point where the upper third and the middle third of the femur would join. And then the bullet, which is on a slight upward trajectory now, exit, along with a couple of pieces of bone, the upper and interior portion of the thigh and travels on. Hood's middle third of his right thigh is shattered by this mini ball that has passed through it. Hood, of course, is immediately in severe pain, and he is caught quickly by some of his staff and escort, and will be taken to the rear. Because of the trajectory of that bullet through the middle third of the right femur, it has transmitted shock waves, which have created fractures in the upper third of the femur. And when the doctors began to examine the wound for where to make the amputation, their desire was to amputate above the highest fracture. And they kept examining higher and higher and higher and higher and higher on the upper third of the right femur. And they never found a point where the fractures ceased. One source says they amputate his leg 2 inches below the hip. Because those fractures continued up into the remains of that femur, they were afraid that he would have an infection and die. There was no certainty that Hood would survive this injury. But he's wounded out there in the field and carried to the rear. As I said, Kershaw did not see that happen. That happened literally. Kershaw is over there, blocked by this block of woods. He learns of Hood's wounding by the arrival of that staff officer. Kershaw now is sending him his brigade forward. The right of the brigade, the right of the 3rd South Carolina, the 7th South Carolina, the 15th South Carolina would be coming out of the woods here. The 8th South Carolina is moving up through the woods on the other side of the field there, and they are engaged in fighting with some of the last Federals that are from Connell and Cruxton's brigades on the north side of the gap. They also will claim capturing 3 artillery pieces, guns that were abandoned by Church's Battery D, 1st Michigan Light Artillery, and Gray's Battery C, 1st Ohio Light Artillery, Connell's and Cruxton's batteries of artillery. In that fight, the Lieutenant Colonel of the 8th South Carolina, Axela Hoole, will be killed. Hoole is pictured here in the uniform as captain of the Darlington Rifles, a pre-war volunteer military company in Darlington, South Carolina. Hoole will become the captain of that company when it becomes Company A of the 8th South Carolina, and he then will become major and then lieutenant colonel of the 8th South Carolina. His body will be taken back to South Carolina and buried in his wife's family cemetery. In this picture, he holds a sword that was given to him by the men of the Darlington Rifles. That sword was returned to the family, and the family story is that this is the sword he was carrying here at the Battle of Chickamauga. Several years ago, the family donated that sword, and it is on display in the exhibits in the Visitor Center, along with a version of this picture. Some of you all might recognize this name, Hoole. Let's see. Yesterday we had a couple of Alabama fans in the group, but the University of Alabama Library on the campus in Tuscaloosa is the Hoole Library. His direct descendant is Stanley Hoole, one of the most important people in Confederate history in the 20th century. His daughter lives in Dalton, and it was her and her sister who arranged for the donation of the sword and a couple of other of Hoole's items. So. So now, after having gone about 200 yards, climbing over a fence in this field, ordering bayonets fixed, Kershaw will send the brigade on forward. Union observers said that the drill of the brigade was so good that it was as if a single mind commanded it. The whole vast mass moved as if by a single mind. I don't know that we can get quite that order out of our group, but it was apparently a very well-drilled brigade. The 2nd South Carolina on the left of the brigade front is actually moving up through those woods to try to outflank the Union line to the north. So let's see if we can make that advance ourselves. Again, be careful of irregularities in the terrain. You'll notice that we're on a little rise of ground right here, and it actually is a projection off of that tip of woods right there. This is the furthest extent of Harker's counterattack down into the field. He advanced to this point because at the time there was a prostrate fence on this rise. We are on the southern edge of a 15-acre area that has been fenced off on the Dyer farm. If you look over along the Glen Kelly Road, right there by the edge of the woods, you can see a split rail fence beginning and running north along the woods. Just about 50 feet further to the south is where the fence line would have turned, and then run across here to where we are, and over here about another 200 feet or so, and then turned and ran north up onto the hill there. We've got part of the northern fence in place. And Harker's men have advanced to the fence on the southern side of this 15-acre enclosure. The fence has already been knocked down, probably from the passage of Brannan's division through here on the 19th. But Harker's men will stop on the fence line, take shelter behind the rails. One of the reasons why Kershaw can say that the Federals were ostentatiously displaying their flags is not only were they just taunting the rebels. As Harker's men looked across the smoke and dust of this field, what did he see down there?
Dressed like us.
A bunch of guys dressed with dark grayish blue jackets and light blue trousers. They might be us. And in all of this confusion, they might confuse us for the enemy. And so color bearers, ostentatiously display your flags. In fact, both others will confuse Kershaw's men for Federals as well. Harker was not convinced of it for a while until he sends another party out to get a little bit closer, and they can finally see the square, white-trimmed Army of Northern Virginia pattern St. Andrew's Cross battle flags of Kershaw's brigade. Harker is then convinced that indeed that is a rebel force and will open fire on them. But by that time, some of the 8th South Carolina is moving through the woods on the other side of the Glen Kelly Road, around the left end of Harker's line, the 64th Ohio, and the 2nd South Carolina. It's left, moving through the woods there. They are going to endanger the right of Harker's line, the 3rd Kentucky and the 65th Ohio. And as Harker realizes he's about to be outflanked, he will order his brigade to withdraw. The last regiment to leave will be the 125th Ohio, who was along in this sector. Their little marker is right down there in the edge of the woods. They will be the last to pull out from this line. Emerson Updike saying that everybody else had left him, and he only withdrew because he had no support to his right or left. Apparently the order to withdraw didn't get to him, or later, when he's writing about this, he just chose to ignore the fact that he'd gotten an order. But they will begin to fall back, and Kershaw's men will continue the advance. Kershaw saying, when within 100 yards of the enemy, they broke, and I opened fire upon them along the whole line, and pursued them rapidly over the first line of hills. That hill just above ahead. Let's go in pursuit of these withdrawing Federals. Reward for suffering with me through that walk. Your only Gettysburg or Antietam-like view on the Chickamauga battlefield. You know, one of the things that so many people who visit here say, really when they say it, they're complaining about it, is that it is so hard to remain oriented here. And my response is, good. You're starting to understand something about the Battle of Chickamauga. You know, most people are so used, well, I shouldn't say most people, but many people who know something about the Civil War have probably been to Gettysburg and to Antietam and some of the other eastern battlefields, Manassas, much more open battlefields. And they have that kind of mental image of what a battlefield should be. And then they come here, and how far can you see at any point on this battlefield? A couple of 100 yards at most. And this is one of the few places where you get a greater view. We're, of course, looking across the Dyer Field. We were to step out a little bit onto the road, we'd be able to see further to the south. But you're looking over the trees. You can see part of what is today Boynton Ridge, at the time of the war, Peavine Ridge, off there to the south of us, stretching off to the south-southwest. It's an illustration also of just how high the wooded hill complex known as Snodgrass Hill actually is also. So, it is from a perspective like this that Emerson Updike and Harker will see Kershaw's brigade advancing. And this is where they then will make that observation about that whole vast mass seemed moved as if by a single mind, watching Kershaw's line move across that field. So, questions or observations here? So this is your reward, but you don't get to enjoy it for long, because we still got Federals to pursue. Kershaw's attack across this ground, when the National Military Park is created, the state of South Carolina chose this rise as the place on which to erect their monument to their Palmetto State troops. The original form of this monument had above that cornice, above the soldier's head, not a stone obelisk that you see today, but a bronze palmetto tree. But you can imagine how attractive a bronze palmetto tree on the top of a mostly open high hill was to lightning and vandals. And pretty soon, it was not a bronze palmetto tree, but more towards a denuded bronze palmetto stump. And the state of South Carolina didn't think that much of that as a symbol. And they removed the bronze palmetto tree and replaced the obelisk. So, it was a very different looking monument with a bronze palmetto tree. There is a monument on the state capitol grounds in Columbia that is a bronze palmetto tree, which is similar to the bronze palmetto tree based on the pictures that was here. And so if you sometime you're in Columbia and you want to see something that looks a little bit like what was on this monument, stop there on the State House grounds, and you can see that. So, I'm going to move just a short distance into the woods here on the trail. Get in the shade. Fire delivered from the high ground in the woods beyond the field. David Augustus Dickert, who's a lieutenant in Company H of the 3rd South Carolina, the Battalion of Direction of the Brigade, or author of the Brigade history, will write, in our first general advance in the morning, as the regiment reached the brow of the hill, just before striking the enemy's breastworks, my company and the other color company, the other company on the other side of the regimental colors, being crowded together by the pressure of the flanks. Remember I said earlier how they're guiding in? Being crowded by the pressure of the flanks on either side, became for a moment tangled and disorganized mass. The I've got some comments written in here, and I should have marked it better. Okay, a sudden discharge of grape from the enemy's batteries, as well as from their sharpshooters posted behind trees, threw us into greater confusion, and many men were shot down unexpectedly. A sergeant in my company, T.C. Nunamaker, received a fearful wound in the abdomen. Catching my hand while falling, he begged to be carried off. "Oh, for God's sake, don't leave me here to bleed to death or to have my life trampled out. Do have me carried off." But the laws of war are inexorable, and none could leave the ranks to care for the wounded. And those whose duty it was to attend such were unfortunately too far in the rear often, seeking places of safety for themselves, to give much thought or concern to the bleeding soldiers. Before our lines were properly adjusted, the gallant sergeant was beyond the aid of anyone. He died from internal hemorrhage. The searchers of the battlefield, those who gathered the wounded and the dead, witnessed many pathetic, novel scenes. He also relates the story of Lewis Spillers, a private in my company, a poor, quiet, and unassuming fellow who had left a wife and little child at home when he donned the gray uniform of gray. He had his thigh broken just to the left of where Sergeant Nunamaker fell. Spillers was as brave as the bravest and made no noise when he received the fatal wound. As the command swept forward down the little dell, he was of course left behind, dragging himself along to the shade of a small tree. He sought shelter behind its trunk, protecting his person as well as he could from the bullets of the enemy posted on the ridge in front, and waited developments. When the litter bearers found him late at night, he was leaning against the tree, calmly puffing away at his clay pipe. When asked why he did not call for assistance, he replied, "Oh no, I thought my time would come after a while to be cared for. So I just concluded to quietly wait and try to smoke away some of my misery." Before morning, he was dead. One might ask the question, what did such men of the South have to fight for? No Negroes, no property, not even a home that they could call their own. What was it that caused them to make such sacrifice, to even give their lives to the cause? It was a principle, and as dear to the poorest of the poor as to him who counted his broad acres by the thousands and his slaves by the hundreds. Of such metal were made the soldiers of the South, unyielding, unconquerable, invincible. Nance relates, "We passed 2 or 3 pieces of artillery on this hill, which I suppose the enemy had failed to put into position before we were upon them. Battery D, 1st Michigan Light Artillery, gets part of their battery back to this position and then has to abandon more of it. Their little marker for them is out there on that open grassy spur. But they will move forward. They will cross the fence at this northern end of the field and go down this slope in pursuit of Federals. But knowing that there are some Federals ahead who still have the will left to fight because of the fire that is coming into to their ranks. Up this slope, the volume of fire they're getting from the crest of the hill above increases. Obviously, the signs of victory they saw in the field down there did not indicate that some Federals still had the will left to fight. And some of those Federals have rallied on that hilltop. But might they still be driven away if they are just assaulted? And so the South Carolinians charge up this slope. We're going to go just a short distance this way so we can look into the low ground, and then walk a short distance down here, and then we'll finish our story. The top of the hill, so you all don't have to easy. Here below hill number 1 on the Snodgrass Hill Complex, the tour road comes up over there. The monuments for Harper's Brigade on the open spur out there in the field. You can see ahead of you there the marker erected by the state of South Carolina for the 15th South Carolina. On the right half of the brigade were the 7th South Carolina, 15th South Carolina, and the 8th South Carolina. The 8th marker is just on the other side of the road there. As Kershaw came up, at least initially, with the 8th South Carolina having been moved through the woods, on the other side of the Glen Kelly Road until such time that Humphrey's brigade actually came up on the brigade right. The right half of Kershaw's brigade gets spread out pretty greatly. The 8th South Carolina on the right, and then there is a gap to the 15th South Carolina, and then a gap to the 7th South Carolina. Kershaw says, my 7th South Carolina, my right center, and 15th Regiment had obliqued to the right. Colonel Hennigan had pursued the enemy so far to the right that when Humphrey's brigade got up, he occupied the interval between the 8th and 15th Regiments. Colonel Oates of the 15th Alabama, Law's brigade, came up on the right of the 7th South Carolina and occupied the line between the 7th and 15th Regiments. And with these regiments advanced without orders. I had sent to the right to direct that I should be informed when Humphreys arrived. Hearing the fire renewed on my right, I advanced the left wing. And so with now a Confederate line here consisting of, in this area, actually probably a little bit further in that direction, the 15th Alabama, well actually the 7th South Carolina, 15th Alabama, the 15th South Carolina, Humphrey's brigade, and then the 8th South Carolina. They advance against this easternmost portion of Snodgrass Hill. Now, one of the reasons why I think for certain that some of these markers need to be pushed a little bit further to the east is that Humphreys, when he attacks, only the left of his brigade gets out in the field there to be fired upon. His two right regiments are not really engaged at all. They're still in the cover of the woods. So I think this line needs to be stretched a little bit that way. But you're looking at the right half now of Kershaw's assault. With other units intermixed in his line, they're attacking mostly the eastern or left end of the Union line on Snodgrass Hills. Questions or observations? Okay. We got just a short distance to go down down towards the left to relate what happens there. For the 7th South Carolina, the color bearer of that regiment was Alfred D. Clark. When the war came, young Clark volunteered and went into the service as a private in a company raised by Captain Samuel J. Hester, which became Company D of the 7th Regiment. The regiment was transferred to the Provisional Army of the Confederate States and went to Virginia. In May of 1862, Clark was appointed ensign or color bearer of the regiment by Colonel Aiken for gallantry, which position he held carrying the flag of the regiment with great coolness in every battle in which this distinguished regiment took part from First Manassas up to and almost through the Battle of Chickamauga. In the Battle of Gettysburg, Ensign Clark was in front of his regiment with his colors aloft. He mounted the breastworks of the enemy, and while in this position, his haversack, which was filled with uncooked rations, was struck by a shell, and flour was scattered in every direction. But Clark was not hurt. But the crowning act of self-possession on the part of Ensign Clark, and the most gallant deed that I witnessed during the war, was in the Battle of Chickamauga. In this battle, a portion of the Corps of Longstreet met forces of George Thomas in a desperate engagement on Snodgrass Hill. Our forces were making a supreme effort to take possession of the position which the last which the enemy occupied. Here, Ensign Clark was, as his custom in battle, was several places in advance of the regiment with his flag so near the line of the enemy that their commanding officer announced aloud that he would give a captain's commission to any man who would capture the flag which Ensign Clark held. Several of his men sprang forward, and at this moment Ensign Clark received a mortal wound. As he fell, he threw his flag backwards over his head, and it landed safely in the hands of his comrades, he falling dead at the muzzles of the guns of the enemy. Comrade, friend, messmate, I have missed you, but the memory of your heroic deeds is a heritage precious to me. His comrade, J.S. Gilbert. somewhere on these slopes, right along in here, is where Ensign Clark conducted that act.
Now, is that the same color bearer that Kershaw was talking to back there?
No, that's a different one. Yeah, this is the 7th South Carolina, so it's the right center of the brigade. Kershaw was talking to the left center, or the direction of battalion, the 3rd South Carolina. Then he goes to the 3rd South Carolina Battalion. Up this trail, up there behind me, you can see another one of the small South Carolina monuments. There are actually 2 up here to the 3rd South Carolina and the 3rd South Carolina Battalion. And then that for the 2nd South Carolina is a little bit further to the west. The Colonel Nance of the 3rd South Carolina writes, "In the meantime, the regiment immediately on my right, the 7th, which had already obliqued much too far to the right of mine, veered still further to the right, and left a gap between us, I suppose of at least 300 yards. With my right flank thus exposed, and my line terribly thinned by the gulling fire that still raged in my front, with no signs of a continued advance on my left, I found it impossible to advance further with any advantage, and I therefore halted and returned the enemy's fire as effectively as I could. I directed an officer to report my surroundings to General Kershaw, who sent an order to retire behind a low ridge just in front of the fence which ran along the northern side of the field." He's talking actually about the low ground that we crossed through. Here the line was reformed, and seeing the importance of holding the position, I directed my men in the lull of battle, which then ensued, to bring forward the rails from the fence mentioned, to make a rude breastwork just behind the crest of the ridge where we had taken position. Soon afterwards the enemy advanced against us, but were very handsomely repulsed by the cool and deliberate fire of our men, of our then thinned line. An irregular fire was then kept up until at length reinforcements came up. Gracie's brigade, which passed over my line and attacked the enemy in the position which he last assailed, or in which we last assailed him. But as far as I could discover, Gracie had no better success. After these reinforcements became engaged, my regiment took no active part in the action, as on account of my heavy losses and on the importance of holding the line then occupied, in case of failure of the impending attack, I understood that I was to act on the defensive. The wisdom of this order was afterwards illustrated. When Gracie's brigade failed to carry this strong position of the enemy, they retired with other troops that had been unsuccessfully thrown against the same point to our left. Night was now near, and the battle thus terminated in my immediate front. My regiment, with those associated with it, became engaged about 12 noon, and I supposed, and continued so until about 4 p.m., without relief or reinforcement. But we drove the enemy nearly half a mile, and were only stopped when we encountered him in large force in a strong position, and though we did not succeed in forcing this position, the enemy eagerly availed himself of the cover of night to retreat from it. Kershaw's men will try charging up this slope, but unsuccessful against the Union troops who have rallied. And they'll then take up position here at the base of the hill. And as Gracie, Kelly, and Trigg of Preston's division come up, they will try their hand at the Union line unsuccessfully as well. To the left, on the left of Kershaw's brigade, where the 2nd South Carolina is attacking, the Angel of Marie's Heights, Sergeant Richard Kirkland, will be killed in the repulse of one of those attacks. Kershaw's brigade engaged in this action, having taken about 1,600 men into battle, is going to suffer 65 killed, 438 wounded, one missing, for a total of 504. almost 33% of the force engaged. Questions or observations? All right. Well, let's start our way back, and we can emulate the wounded being carried to the rear for treatment. Right, Rommel?
Let's start with, is this hill number 2?
Yes, we're underneath hill number 2 right here. Yes. I'm sorry?
So let's guard prisoners instead of wounded.
Oh, guard prisoners, okay. Instead of carrying wounded. To fellows, Captain Washington Albert Putz Williams, the acting major of the 3rd South Carolina. The regiments of Kershaw's brigade, many of them are short officers because of the casualties at Gettysburg, or some officers have not made all of the trip here yet, like the colonel of the 2nd South Carolina. But Captain Williams, the regular captain of Company F, is serving as the acting major. There's another captain serving as the acting lieutenant colonel. The tactics really only work if you have somebody acting as colonel, lieutenant colonel, and major in the unit. And so Captain Williams was acting as major. One of the corporals of Company A, 3rd South Carolina, is Corporal Tolliver Tally N. He literally changed his middle name while in college. Oh, he was a Wofford student. Changed his middle name to, I forget from what to, but he changed it to N for nothing. Simpson. And his letters and his brother's letters have been published as a book entitled Far, Far Away. Reverend John M. Carlisle, chaplain of the 7th South Carolina, to Brother Richard Franklin Simpson. September 22nd, Ringgold, Georgia. Dear Brother Simpson, it is my mournful duty to communicate to you that your dear family, to you and your dear family, the fact that your son and my dear young friend, Tally, fell on the bloody field of Sunday last, the 20th instant. He was shot through the heart by a minie ball. His left arm was broken, and either a grape or canister shot passed through his head, supposed to be after he fell. He was doing his duty and met his fate as a brave soldier. He fell with his face to the foe. I buried him yesterday, putting him away as carefully as circumstances allowed. I placed him by the side of Captain Williams, whom you know. The grave is marked. It is near the home of Robert H. Dyer, Walker County, Georgia, 4 miles from Crawfish Springs. Harry Miller's boy, Jim, was with me, and should you at any time desire to remove him, Jim can identify the spot. My brother, you have my prayers and sympathies under this sore bereavement, for though I know that as much as possible you were prepared for such an event, yet you can but mourn for your firstborn and noble son. Simpson is amongst, and Putz William are amongst the 69 who are killed, or 65 who were killed in Kershaw's brigade. And once the battle is over, it is the gathering of the wounded and the dead. Dickard writes, the work of the soldier was not done with the coming of night. Soldiers in groups and by ones and twos scoured the battlefield, first gathering up the wounded and then remove them to the field infirmaries, and then the dead. The latter were moved to new cities to be built for them, the city of the dead. The builders were already at work on the last of their dwelling places, scooping out shallow graves with bayonets, knives, and such tools as were at hand. Many pathetic spectacles were witnessed by brother burying brother. My brother and 5 other members of the company were laid side by side, wrapped only in their blankets, in the manner of the red man in the legend who fought and died here in the long, long ago. Here we left them in all their glory, amid the sacred stillness that now reigned over the once stormy battlefield, where but a short while before the tread of the struggling regions, the thunder of the cannon, and the roar of the infantry mingled in sympathetic confusion. But now the awful silence and quietude that pervades the field after battle, where lay the dreamless sleepers of friend and foe, victor and vanquished, the blue and the gray, with none to sing their requiems. Nothing heard save the plaintive notes of the night bird or the faint murmurs of the grief of a comrade who are placing the sleepers in their shallow beds. Other observers note that this area below the hill where the South Carolina monument is today had become essentially the graveyard of Kershaw's brigade. This battlefield had become a graveyard. About 4,000 soldiers are buried in mostly unit burials at different places across the field, or for Union soldiers given rudimentary burial. As I said in another program, in a lot of ways, the Battle of Chickamauga had only begun as it unfolded and came to an end on September the 20th, because now the effects of that battle will be felt in echoes, waves, and ripples into the future. I hope this week, as you go about your normal business on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you take a moment to recognize the anniversary dates and think about these hellacious things that unfolded on this ground, that hallowed this ground, that helped shape our nation's history. And I hope you have a little better sense of that by this program, and for many of you all, the others that you've participated in yesterday and today. We've got just a short distance to go before we cut through the woods to back to theoretically where our motor vehicles should be located. So.